In 2021, the Line Production Company partnered with Studio Ghibli composer Joe Hisaishi to create a beautifully animated commercial for Chobani yogurt. Dear Alice features a farm clearly taking its inspirations from the solar punk genre, combining futuristic technology with sustainable energy and an abundance of flora and fauna. The line describes it as not a perfect utopia, but a version of a future we can all reach if we just decide to put in the work. The Chobani yogurt products stick out like a sore thumb, littered throughout the commercial as the only example of single-use plastics. Commenter at Purple Lord described it as an anti-commercial. Quote, "I have never wanted to buy cup yogurt less." Unfortunately, it is still a commercial trying to sell you yogurt, making its solar punk vision feel quite superficial. That's why YouTuber Waffle to the Left created what they called a decommodified version of Dear Alice, with all advertising carefully edited out. Waffle to the Left recognized the beauty in this commercial, but to flourish as the anti-capitalist vision of the future that solar punk is supposed to be, it needed to be taken out of its capitalist context. This is a version of Dear Alice that belongs to the people. Anyway, this video is about, Toontown Online? Quick disclaimer, this is actually an adaptation of my undergrad thesis, just with some of the more formal academic stuff cut out. I'm only mentioning this so people don't think I'm plagiarizing my own work in case you come across it. If you're a new viewer, I've started this tradition of redrawing my Beetle avatar inspired by the material I'm covering. Keyword inspired because my god, this one was hard to draw. But okay, let's get into what this video is actually about, Toontown Online. Toontown Online was a massive, multiplayer, online role-playing game made in 2003 by the Walt Disney Company in collaboration with Shell Games. The colorful, anthropomorphic player character Toons were tasked with the challenge of fighting an invading force of Cogs, grayscale robots determined to turn Toontown into a corporate wasteland. The game's servers were shut down in 2013, but, well, I'm getting ahead of myself. Throughout the years, players have taken note of Toontown's bizarrely anti-capitalist, or at the very least anti-corporate theming. There are no subtleties when it comes to the Cogs, presented as greedy businessmen with names such as Loan Sharks, Robber Barons, Mr. Hollywoods, and so on. In contrast, the fun-loving Toons use various slapstick-style gags to defeat their corporate invaders. It's a fun concept for a cartoon children's game, but how did we get there? What could possibly be the inspiration for pitting cartoon comedy tropes against capitalist robots? And why did Disney allow it? There are pretty simple answers to these questions, which we'll get to, but if you dig just a bit deeper, if you take the time to analyze Toontown's history, gameplay, and themes, a much more complex and fascinating narrative starts to unfold. One that, intentionally or otherwise, poses children's play as a radical, revolutionary tool against the adult capitalist status quo. But first, let's take a look at our terms, because anti-capitalism can mean a lot of different things. It's broad on purpose. I'm not here to claim Toontown is specifically communist, for example, though communist ideas will come into play. What we can do, though, is pick out some themes found in children's media that, especially when paired together, create an anti-capitalist narrative. Think of them as important tools in an anti-capitalist toolbox. We already mentioned one of them, anti-corporatism, a movement against the domination of corporations across the globe. This one will be the easiest and least interesting to prove is going on in Toontown, but still important. A more minor theme that is often paired with anti-corporatism is environmentalism. Think children's stories like The Lorax, where a greedy businessman or large company destroys the environment. A bit more on that later. Then there is anti-colonialism. Colonialism was, and still is, a massive tool for the spread of capitalism. And to me, any anti-capitalist narrative is incomplete without a decolonial perspective. While nothing about the Toons are representative of indigenous culture, the Cogs parody US political and economic culture, so colonialism is very relevant. A great example of an anti-colonial children's story is The True Meaning of Smek Day by Adam Rex. You may have heard of the movie adaptation Home, but the book is a lot more explicit in its parody of US colonialism. Lastly, we have anti-authoritarianism. Probably the most controversial term here. Plenty argue capitalism promotes anti-authoritarianism, and there are definitely authoritarian anti-capitalist movements. But I think you'll understand why I include it when you see how media like Toontown uses it. With the role of parents, teachers, and other adult figures in kids' lives, authority is explored in all kinds of ways in children's media. You can find the overlap between anti-capitalism and anti-authoritarianism in one of my favorite children's series, The Moomins by Tove Jansson. The creatures of Moomin Valley are frequently shown to resist authority and industrialization, while also promoting freedom, even between parent and child. If you're confused by any of these terms, don't worry. They're just here to explain some of my framework, but I studied media analysis, not political science. This is a video about how children's literature and media take on anti-capitalist ideas, and what makes children's media like Toontown a great place for these ideas. Does that mean everyone who worked on Toontown was a radical leftist trying to convert children? Of course not. There's a good chance some of the points I talk about here weren't intentional at all, but that's literary analysis for you. Intention isn't the end-all be-all, though I will touch on it. This is also a video about Toontown. I'll be talking at length about its inspirations and origins, like DuckTales and Who Framed Roger Rabbit. And I'll be talking about what Toontown has become today through its fandom and fan servers. So even if political literary analysis isn't quite your style, come learn some stuff about cartoons with me. I didn't read a bunch of Scrooge McDuck comics and Toontown Rewritten blog posts for nothing. But there's no point in diving into Toontown's inspirations if you don't know anything about Toontown Online to begin with. Let's start with our beloved, customizable player characters, the Toons. Creating your Toon was the first step in joining the online world of Toontown, besides downloading the game, I guess. Though it was a pretty robust character creator, Toons came in a variety of sizes, colors, and species. Upon entering the world of Toontown, you're taught about the cogs taking over Toon streets, the slapstick gags used to defeat them, and the currency our Toontown economy uses. Jelly beans. You use them to buy gags, clothes, furniture, and pets. They're also uniquely a food source. We don't see Toons eat them directly, but you can feed them to your pet Doodle and plant them in soil to grow flowers. It's a fun currency for kids that keeps gameplay cleverly simple. Why code in a separate item for fish bait that players would have to buy anyway, if the currency can act as fish bait itself? But the system also distinguishes Toon money from a real-world currency like a US dollar. A jelly bean has real value that can be weighed when trading them for other goods and services, while a dollar's value is more symbolic. That alone doesn't mean Toons don't have a capitalist economy, but it is an interesting contrast to the Cog's Cog bucks, which just look like US dollars. There are even gags that lure Cogs using dollar bills. How do Toons get jelly beans? You can sell fish you caught to the pet shop, or sell your flowers, but the main way is by hopping on the trolley, a free ride to minigames that earn you jelly beans. Are the minigames jobs? There's a couple you could interpret that way. I guess you're performing labor by catching these fruit, but then why are your NPC coworkers also throwing weights at you? Simple. It's fun. It's what Toons do. So the main way to make money in Toontown is to have fun. That's not exactly a revelation. It's a game, of course it wants you to have fun. Is Neopets anti-capitalist for giving you money when you play dress up or win at Mahjong? God no, Neopets loves capitalism. But minigames that earn you free money is just one way Toontown demonstrates fun as a social and economic priority. I mean, these are Toons we're talking about. Fun and silliness is their way of life. And hey, why is it a trolley anyway? The idea of Toontown, a neighborhood or city of cartoon characters, first came from Gary K. Wolfe's Who Censored Roger Rabbit, a fantasy mystery novel about the murder of a living comic strip character. Toontown is only mentioned offhandedly in the novel, but its 1988 movie adaptation Who Framed Roger Rabbit turns it into a major plot point. In the movie, Roger Rabbit is now an animated cartoon character who works in entertainment, but his zany antics are not just for show. He and most of the other Toons of Toontown take fun and silliness very seriously. If you haven't seen Who Framed Roger Rabbit, I highly recommend it, but I now have to spoil a large part of the movie for you. Toontown is owned by the fictional company Acme Corporation. The owner, Marvin Acme, gives ownership of Toontown to the Toons in his will. However, the shareholder of the transit company Cloverleaf Industries has Marvin Acme murdered and his will hidden in a scheme to destroy Toontown and its inhabitants, building a freeway in its place. The film ends with the antagonists defeated and Toontown officially belonging to the Toons. I wouldn't quite describe Roger Rabbit's plot as anti-capitalist. It contrasts a benevolent corporation with a malicious one, and when all's said and done, Toons are still expected to happily participate in the capitalist animation industry. But its commentary is still important. There's a reason it's a transit company trying to destroy Toontown, a neighborhood in LA. Throughout the mid-20th century, LA County's cheap and reliable streetcar system was replaced with car-centric infrastructure that displaced thousands of residents, most of whom were Black or Latinx. Wealthier and predominantly white cities like Beverly Hills were able to prevent freeway construction due to their independent status, while protests in ethnically diverse communities like Boyle Heights were unable to. A case study done by UCLA examining freeway expansion in Pasadena found that routing through historically Black neighborhoods was entirely intentional. As far as I know, Toontown is not meant to represent any specific minority neighborhood in LA, but these historical displacements are absolutely being used as a reference point, emphasized by the depiction of the Pacific Electric Railway, a trolley system that Cloverleaf Industries buys out with the aim to destroy it.
Who needs a car in LA? We got the best public transportation system in the world.
Now, the reason the trolley is used in Toontown Online is because of its use in Mickey's Toontown, a theme park in Disneyland based on the movie. It's possible no one on the team was aware of its historical commentary, but that doesn't make it any less notable, especially in analyzing the broader culture of the Toons. Toontown in the game is not a neighborhood in LA, but perhaps a utopian vision of what Roger Rabbit's Toontown could have been. An independent land where Toons have control of their own economy. They can playfully throw pies and drop pianos on each other to their heart's content, and the trolley remains, free for all to ride. Trolley games are just one way Toontown's play-based economy and culture is emphasized. There's the gags, of course, which are usually a positive when used on Toons rather than cogs. But there's also Toon Health. The HP in Toontown, called Laugh Points, is not your typical physical health measurement, but instead a measurement of joy. When a Toon loses all their laugh points, they go sad. Laugh points can be recovered through tune-up gags, collecting free items like ice cream, or even just running around Toon playgrounds for a while. Joy is Toon's main line of defense against cogs, and that joy is Toontown's #1 priority. Toontown's play-based economy also appears to be 100% voluntary. There are aspects of capitalist culture in Toontown. The streets are filled with what appear to be small businesses, though the only shops you can actually buy anything from are the gag shops and a furniture catalog. However, every Toon that enters Toontown is given a furnished house and free means to keep laugh points high. While players must interact with the economy to progress in the game, the fictional Toons are free to make their own choices without worrying about making ends meet. If a Toon wants money, they're encouraged to gain it in a way that's enjoyable rather than necessary. This is where anti-authoritarian themes come into play. Capitalism is often called a free market system, as consumers are given free choice over their purchases and job prospects. But from an anti-capitalist standpoint, it's really capitalists who have control over the market, and the working class is required to participate in that market to survive. It's for this reason anti-capitalists often describe capitalism and the private business sector as authoritarian. In Toontown, there are no Toon capitalists managing the labor of a Toon working class. A wealthy Toon, while having access to more material goods, holds no power over less wealthy Toons. And with the established welfare system, Toons are given much more freedom in their market choices, including the choice to stay the hell out of it. Toontown's cooperative gameplay is another aspect that encourages an anti-authoritarian reading. Excluding some of the trolley games, Toontown gameplay relies on cooperation. Cog battles can have up to 4 players, and later bosses in the game allow up to 8 players, with no expectation that any Toon could defeat them alone. Players can also friend each other, send private messages, and teleport to each other's locations. Community and collaboration are crucial in anti-capitalist theory, especially if dismantling authoritarian systems is the goal. There's this delightful collection of leftist children's literature called Tales for Little Rebels that demonstrates this well. Helen Kay's Battle in the Barnyard features a colony of chickens resisting against an authoritarian rooster. Jerome Schwartz's Oscar the Ostrich features an ostrich hiding his head in a dune while a tyrant steals all the other dunes. When Oscar's dune is finally stolen, instead of taking on the tyrant on his own, he organizes with his fellow ostriches. Just like these stories, the cooperative model of Toontown Online recognizes the success of one Toon is dependent on the success of many. And as we'll explore in the next section, they too are organizing against the authoritarian power of the Cogs. Since the game is an MMO, cooperative gameplay wasn't limited to playing with family or friends. It was common practice to play Toontown with strangers. Player Toons would wait outside boss areas until enough Toons had gathered for the battle. It wasn't perfect. Sometimes players would try to exclude lower level Toons by leaving elevators when they hopped on, but for the most part, any Toon, regardless of laugh level or jellybean accruement, were able to join with their fellow Toons for both play and resistance. All of these decisions I'm describing, the cooperative gameplay, the resources for new Toons, and the play-based economy, have very obvious intentions. They're trying to make a game that's fun for children, while also appealing to parents and Disney shareholders. Since Toontown Online wasn't an educational game, it was important Jesse Schell's team could point to these ideas as beneficial for children. But how exactly they achieve this is so fascinating and unique. The entire plot is framed around this kids' world versus adult world narrative, not by pitting actual kids versus actual adults, but instead creating an entire culture around children's play posed against the adult capitalist world. This puts the game in a strange position between two realities. One is the real world, in which a team of adults working for corporations created a children's video game to, at least in part, make a profit. Even if the creators of Toontown express a desire to create a fun experience over the profit incentive, it would be foolish to ignore this reality. The second reality, however, is the world of Toontown itself, in which Toons are free to enjoy life to the fullest without restrictive authoritative figures or the fear of not making ends meet. It would be foolish to ignore this reality too, no matter how fictional it is. It is a reality every player of Toontown Online was given the chance to experience. Naturally, these two realities come into conflict with each other throughout the game. For example, the cost. You could play Toontown for free, but it was extremely limited, with access to only one playground. But if you, or more accurately your parents, paid $9.95 a month, you had access to all 6 playgrounds, 4 Cog HQs, and more. Since it was a kids game, there also had to be a fairly strict chat moderation. Every Toon could speak with speed chat, a list of pre-typed phrases. If enabled on a player's account, they could also use Speed Chat Plus to type words freely, except any words not in Toontown's dictionary would be rejected and turned into an animal onomatopoeia.
Meow, 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 meow.
Despite this, Toontown's play held something special. In the book Children at Play in American History, Howard Chudakoff describes a history of independent, unstructured children's play in the United States. A time when kids could come together in their neighborhoods and make up their own kinds of play. No adult supervision or adult written rules necessary. Quote, "Children often have inhabited 2 cultural realms, one that abides the expectations of parents, and one that sustains children's alternative and sometimes contrary inclinations. That second realm has constituted children's independent play culture. As play has become more commercialized and digitized, unstructured play has been limited, but children always find a way to make play their own. Maybe you remember making up your own games in your school playground, or creating stories with dolls and board game pieces. Toontown Online, with its linear task system, minigames, and moderation, can't really be described as unstructured play. The entire kids' culture it builds for Toons, the slapstick comedy, cartoon characters, and other playful antics, are built from commercialized entertainment. But in the emerging digital landscape of the early 2000s, it was an early example of an online, play-based social group that provided avenues for independent play. Toon Roleplay shows how kids were able to get past any game limitations or censors to play their way. Toon Valley, one of TTO's many servers or districts, was designated by players as the main place to socialize and roleplay. One common form was the creation of clans. Inspired by the Warriors book series, mostly cat Toons would form their own clans and sometimes even battle enemy clans. This 13-year-old video by Strand of Numbers shows how players got past the chat filters. Clans eventually expanded outside of Warriors roleplay, and became a way to easily meet up with low-level Toons to play together. My own favorite memories of Toontown as a kid were game shows, where Toons made up a bunch of their own mini-games to play. A popular favorite was Closet Dodge. The host would enter Move Furniture mode in their house, and move around their wardrobe. If a Toon got caught by the wardrobe, it would open and place them in a cutscene to change clothes, so everyone could see they got caught. It was a really creative way to transform Toontown's gameplay. And there are so many examples of this, like people making Toontown movies, or just posting their roleplay on YouTube. None of this type of play was exclusive to Toontown Online. It was fairly common in MMOs, but when these social opportunities are paired with non-capitalist play-based economy, cooperative gameplay mechanics, and a world built on children's media and play culture, Toontown is propelled past its capitalist reality into an anti-authoritarian and non-capitalist utopia for kids. The children that made up Toontown's player base were able to find a new form of unstructured play and immerse themselves in a realm free of the rule of parents, the rule of money, and the rule of government. The only rule within the world of Toontown was the Toons, the children's, the people's rule. If you're less familiar with Toontown and think what I've said so far is a stretch, don't worry. All those decisions I described to characterize Toon culture become a lot more anti-capitalist when posed against our beloved evil corporate robots, the Cogs. When first designing the antagonists for Toontown Online, the theme of child's play versus adult rule came up pretty quickly. Early ideas involved not just businessmen, but also teachers, dentists, and any adult figure that had power over children. They didn't think that would go over well with parents, so they instead went with evil business people, at the time called suits. Did Disney have a problem with that? Absolutely.
Had some executives who were not happy about this. They thought it was insulting to executives. So we were like, okay, well, we'll change it to robots. But we kept them as business guys because that was kind of funny, so we made the business robots, which honestly, I think ended up better.
Reimagined as robots and renamed the Cogs, the game devs didn't even try to be subtle with their theming. As described on the game's website, Cogs are nasty, menacing robots who want to take over Toontown and transform it into a laughless corporate wasteland. They're divided into 4 types: Sellbots, Cashbots, Lawbots, and Bossbots. We'll take a closer look at each type and their headquarters, but first we gotta take a little detour to talk about the Cog's origins, as well as another inspiration for Toontown Online. In Toontown's early years, an intro video would play while downloading, showing how the Cogs were made. Scrooge McDuck finds a giant robot created by his hired inventor, Dr. Gyro Gearloose. When Scrooge activates it, it creates the Cog army, kidnaps Scrooge, and commands the Cogs to take over Toontown. The video was eventually removed, and is arguably not canon, but Dr. Gearloose creating the Cogs was later referenced in the 2017 DuckTales reboot. Jessie Shell cites the Uncle Scrooge comics and the fictional city of Duckburg as major inspirations for Toontown, which used to strike me as odd. Scrooge, Donald's great-uncle and richest duck in the world, is well known for the money bin he built in Duckburg, a massive building made to keep Scrooge's piles of wealth. While Scrooge's greed is often criticized, his characterization in DuckTales emphasizes his heroic spirit as a self-described adventure capitalist, his wealth acquired from the bottom up through a life of exploration and hard work. How did we start with this American dream capitalist figurehead and get to evil capitalist robots colonizing a Toon utopia? Judging by the fact Scrooge is named after Ebenezer Scrooge, a greedy businessman who learns generosity, there must be more to the duck than meets the eye. Cartoonist Carl Barks first created Scrooge for the 1947 Donald Duck comic Christmas on Bear Mountain, in which Donald and his nephews are invited to Scrooge's mansion to test their courage. Throughout the comic, Scrooge is depicted as selfish and misanthropic like his namesake, but his heart is changed when he believes Donald and his nephews to be courageous and worthy of gifts. His second appearance, The Old Castle Secret, introduces his Scottish heritage and his early cowardly nature, far from the adventurous Scrooge we see in modern day. For the most part, Carl Barks used Scrooge to push the plot towards adventure for Donald and his nephews, often due to his own misdeeds. He's not exactly an antagonist, but he can be antagonistic. A good example of this is his character in the 1949 comic Voodoo Hoodoo. Content warning, this comic is violently racist. By this point, Scrooge had been established as the richest duck in the world, and he tells a story about how he stole land in Africa from a tribe of ferocious savages to create a rubber plantation. In an attempt to shrink Scrooge with a voodoo doll in vengeance, Donald is inflicted instead. The rest of the comic features Donald and his nephews flying to Africa to remove the curse. Not only is it filled with racist caricatures and made-up voodoo stereotypes, The villagers are also given no sympathy in this story. Despite this, we are supposed to recognize Scrooge as a bad guy in this comic. He laughs about Donald being inflicted with the curse, and doesn't care at all to help him get rid of it. Scrooge's cruelty and greed are used for comedic effect, and create conflict for the nephews to solve. This Scrooge is a lot closer to the one we see in the Cog origin story, but it's not the Scrooge most audiences would know by 2003. The switch to Scrooge as a protagonist in the Uncle Scrooge series only changed his character slightly at first. Issue number 1, Only a Poor Old Man, still sees Scrooge be stingy with his fortune, underpaying his nephews for work and demonstrating a paranoia in losing his money. But there's a lot more emphasis on the hard work Scrooge has put in to make and protect his money. The cowardly aspect of his early depictions absent. Scrooge lectures Donald about the value of this hard work and the benefits of saving money, but in the end, Donald tells him his wealth only weighs him down, that he is only a poor old man because of it. This was an excellent way to start the series, as it not only recontextualizes Scrooge, but also Donald. While the Donald Duck comics follow a working-class protagonist characterized by his frequent laziness, Uncle Scrooge gives Donald a foil that both challenges and shows the value in his lifestyle through the extreme means Scrooge must go to for his wealth. While a lust for wealth never leaves Scrooge's character, he becomes a lot more sympathetic throughout the Uncle Scrooge comics. In issue number 30, for example, Scrooge almost accidentally drowns a shrunken village with oil. Due to his mistake, he spends millions of dollars to provide the village with fresh water and soil, though he claims it was to protect his image. This seems far from the Scrooge who smiled while telling the story of his land theft in Africa, and that's something future cartoonists had to grapple with. Bringing us much closer to Toontown's release is Don Rosa, who in 1994 made the ballsy move to revisit the Voodoo Hoodoo storyline in The Life and Times of Scrooge McDuck. A younger Scrooge has become more selfish and hardened due to his increasing fortune, making unfair business deals his family doesn't agree with. Scrooge commits the same atrocity that he did in the original story, hiring a group to run the Voodoo Tribe out of their village. But this time, it's described as the only dishonest deed of his entire life, one that would haunt him for years to come. It's only when his sisters leave him that he realizes he's failed to live up to the promise of making honest money, and he fails to make amends with the leader of the village. He plans to return home and apologize to his sisters, but instead gets distracted by various money-making ventures around the world for 30 years. By the time he returns to Duckburg, he is distrustful of all people and shuts out his family, only beginning to recover his old self when he reconnects with Donald and the nephews. Don Rosa successfully captures both the original, misanthropic Scrooge McDuck and the adventurous, hardworking, secretly noble Scrooge of the modern era, but he also demonstrates a huge problem that comes with depicting Scrooge as a protagonist. We're supposed to believe Scrooge's land theft in Africa was a uniquely abhorrent moment in his life of fortune hunting, but the way Scrooge collects his fortune as an adventure capitalist implies that simply can't be true. We even see this in the 1987 DuckTales show, many episodes revolving around Scrooge and the nephews going on ventures to discover lost treasures. Maybe Rosa would have depicted Scrooge making honest sales deals for said treasure, I don't know. But the Scrooge of DuckTales doesn't tend to consider where artifacts come from before taking them for himself. When presenting Scrooge as this honest, hardworking protagonist, you either have to justify or ignore the implications of how he gained his wealth, from a history of exploitation and imperial capitalist gain. Maybe it's for the best, then, that the Cog origin video was removed and Scrooge McDuck is never mentioned in Toontown's canon, because in the end, the Cogs he was so terrified of aren't that different from Scrooge himself. The Cogs aim to introduce a capitalist market to Toontown, including oil factories and office buildings just like the one Scrooge owns. Supposedly, Duckburg inspired Toontown, a city tormented by Scrooge capitalist exploits and ugly-ass money bin. In Rosa's comics, many people in Duckburg have grown to resent Scrooge McDuck, despite him bringing economic success to the city. And in Bark's comics, Donald sees the joylessness that comes with Scrooge's success. Maybe that's the Duckburg that informs the creation of Toontown, a world that resists the economic power of capitalist exploits in a pursuit of joy. Okay, enough of those ducks. Let's finally take a closer look at the Cogs. As we've discussed, the cogs are meant to contrast the playful, childlike culture of Toontown, and it just so happens to do so by parodying the corporate side of US adult culture. You can see this pretty easily in various cog names. The Robber Baron, for example, references critiques of US businessmen in the late 19th and early 20th century for business practices such as cornering the market, interfering with the government, and damaging natural resources. All things Scrooge McDuck has definitely done, but it goes much farther than just names. Analyzing the methods cogs use to construct their economy and government provides a much deeper understanding of the anti-capitalist framework used for Toontown's world building. Cogs invade the streets of Toontown outside of Toon's playground safe havens. They'll fight any Toon who crosses their path, but their main purpose here is to take over buildings. Any cog can randomly enter a Toon building, and a few seconds later, a giant grayscale cog building will come crashing down on top of it. It is a literal corporate takeover of small businesses, a common anti-corporate critique. Groups of 1 to 4 Toons can then enter the building to take it back, fighting cogs at each level until the whole thing is dismantled. While we still don't know much about how these Toon small businesses are run, or if these streets are publicly owned or whatever, it's very clear the battle against cog buildings is a battle against a corporate takeover of the Toon economy. Cog buildings, however, are just one tool in the cog's capitalist tool belt. The entirety of Cog Nation is defined by the capitalist market they aim to create, even their leisure culture being influenced by this. To understand their culture further, all one has to do is look at the headquarters cogs have made on the edges of Toontown's map. Each of the 4 cog types has a dedicated HQ with unique bosses and a purpose in Cog Nation's effort to take over Toontown. The first Cog HQ Toons have access to is the Cellbot HQ, located in the bottom left corner of the map, just off Daisy's Gardens. The ground and skydrop are entirely gray, contrasting the blue skies and green hills of the gardens. The land is littered with pipes, buckets, and oil spills. Surprise, surprise, the robots are in the business of oil. Within the HQ is the Cellbot factory, where 1 to 4 Toons could fight their way through to defeat the factory foreman. In the factory, we see Cellbots are the main producers for much of the cog's resources, including oil, paint, gears, pipes, and office supplies. Defeat the factory enough times, and you could collect a Cellbot disguise to infiltrate Cellbot towers with up to 8 Toons and fight the senior vice president. What all the VP does for Cog Nation, we don't know, but we do see he can store cogs in his underbelly and promote them to full-fledged Cellbots. He's also in the business of kidnapping Toon shopkeepers and political figures. The Cellbot HQ shares a resemblance to many Enviro-Toons, animated works that depict varying ideas of the environment and how humans affect it. An early example is Disney's 1942 film Bambi, in which humans are a background antagonist that kill Bambi's mother and cause destruction to the forest. These eco-critical themes start to show up a lot more with the environmentalist movement of the late 20th century, and with it, corporate destruction. The Lorax probably comes to mind for a lot of you, a story in which an entrepreneur decimates an entire forest to build a business around a meaningless product. Just like in Toontown, the growing business causes the pages to get darker, grayer, and more desolate. It's a bleak children's cautionary tale about corporate greed, but it ends with a hopeful note. The Onceler provides a child with the last truffula tree seed. Quote, "Unless someone like you cares a whole awful lot, nothing is going to get better, it's not." Dr. Marwa Assam Eldon Fahmy describes the Lorax as an anti-capitalist story, emphasizing the ecological devastation and irony of unending growth as an economic goal. Quote, "The Onceler presents an economic growth model that incorporates mastery without any notion of sustainability. His entrepreneurial ability to create a demand for the useless garment need, and the acquisitiveness of the consumers who purchase it, ensure the destruction of the resource that produces the garment. While Cellbots aren't producing needs, their existence as robots with questionable levels of sentience, destroying the environment to forever increase their business-fueled society is, shocker, also an ironic depiction of industrial capitalism. Toontown just takes that irony a step further by having the capitalist robots be their own products. A useless, destructive machine that only exists to create more machines. Toons, on the other hand, see there is much more to the world than production and consumption. They play, they tend to their environment, and most importantly, they care a whole awful lot. The next HQ players typically enter is the Cashbot HQ, found on the top left corner of the map off Donald's Dreamland. The bulk of it is an indoor train station, less for transporting cogs and more for transporting that good old green stuff. Window views show a dark gray sky with towering office buildings, suggesting an extended Cog Nation not accessible in-game. The cashbots oversee the production and distribution of Cog bucks. The HQ included 3 mints for money production: the coin mint, the dollar mint, and the bullion mint, where players could enter to earn their cashbot disguise and battle the chief financial officer in the cashbot HQ vault. This HQ is basically the urban version of the Cellbot HQ. The noise of the train and lights of the city distract from the fact it's just as grey and lifeless as the Cellbot's desolate rural land. Both are centers for capitalist production, but the Cashbot HQ is, quite literally, where the money is made. This might remind you of what we already discussed with Who Framed Roger Rabbit, where a transit company attempted to destroy the Toontown neighborhood in LA, but that was a critique of car-centric building projects, not trains. And while trains nowadays are more associated with leftist, public-oriented politics, we can't ignore how trains were used in American history. Railroads can be seen as a symbol of manifest destiny, the idea that European colonists were fated to expand their US colonial project westward. Manu Karuka describes the United States historical railways as tools for both colonial and capital spread. Quote, "Railways enabled the circulation of colonial commodities throughout the imperial core, and even more importantly, they made the large-scale export of financial and industrial capital to the colonies a central feature of global capitalism." This is where colonial themes start to become most clear in Toontown. Cog Nation represents a much larger cultural takeover that goes farther than just economics, transforming Toontown in a world fit for the capitalist cogs. Their robotic nature is once again relevant. Created to expand business ventures, they determine the invasion of Toontown is well within their intended purpose, a parody of Manifest Destiny. The fact cogs weren't originally imagined as robots may mean this isn't intentional, but that doesn't make it any less of an effective allegory. The cashbot's role in this colonization is the same transportive infrastructure of US colonial history, promoted by the promising flow of cash. Lawbots are where things get a little more complicated, and so I need to emphasize an important piece of this analysis. I am interpreting Cog Nation as a government with a business structure to it. You can interpret Cogs invading Toontown as one corporate entity separate from Cog Nation's government, or you can interpret it as the government itself. Both can work for an anti-capitalist analysis, but the latter makes the most sense to me in how Cogs are represented in Toontown Online. The Lawbot HQ is located in the top right corner of the map next to the Berg. The main exterior features shiny marble flooring, giant statues of gavels, and a background filled with buildings and skyscrapers. Toons could enter the district attorney's office to steal jury notices and eventually access the courthouse, where they would battle the Chief Justice. The boss fight featured a Toon NPC on trial. Players would fight for Toon spots on the jury and tip the scales of injustice in their favor, while Cogs forged evidence against the Toon. The legal proceedings of Toons are explored even less than their business proceedings. The Toontown Online website states, "The Lawbots are manipulating the Toontown legal system with Cog rulings," which suggests Toons and Cogs have a similar judicial system. But without that out-of-game context, it appears the Lawbots are enforcing their own legal system onto Toons, just as they are enforcing their own economy. Regardless, the Lawbot Courthouse is an obvious parody of the US judicial government. Note that the Chief Justice boss is the only boss of the 4 HQs that has a governmental title rather than a business title. While capitalists don't always follow the law, US law has a long history of supporting capitalist goals and maintaining colonial capitalist culture. I'm not interested in diving too deep into US legal history in this video, but some examples: the displacement and genocide of Native American lives and culture through legal proceedings such as the Indian Removal Act of 1830, robber barons of the early 20th century and their lawyers lobbying or often filling seats in Congress themselves, just the entirety of the Reagan administration. I could go on. And yes, the US does have multiple antitrust laws made to prevent monopolies and other consequences of unregulated capitalism, but they are frequently ignored by courts. If you're interested in this history, I'll put a few sources from my thesis on screen and in the description, but the point is, for the most part, the US government and the US private sector have enjoyed a mutually beneficial relationship, and in a parodic depiction of them, could easily be viewed as one and the same. US law has also always been prepared to support colonists in manifesting their capitalist destiny. If the sellbots and cashbots represent the rise of industrial capitalism in the colonized United States, lawbots represent the governing bodies that feed capitalist power and enforce colonial rule, or at least the judicial side, one branch of the checks and balances US government, which has continuously found itself supporting and being supported by the capitalist economy. The final hideout for Cogs, the BossBot HQ, was in the bottom right corner of the map, attached to Chippendale's Minigolf. Going off the Lawbot HQ, you would assume the BossBot HQ would be a parody of the executive or legislative branches of the US government. And that's kind of true, but not in the way you would expect. This is the location of the BossBot's Country Club, where elite cogs join together in the delights of golf. Toons could infiltrate the cogs golf courses to collect stock options, and fight the BossBot Chief Executive Officer in his banquet hall. The fight involves disguising as a waiter, feeding oil to impatient cogs, and pelting the CEO with golf balls. The use of golf to represent cog leisure culture is the final nail in the coffin for Toontown Online's parody of US capitalism, and my god did I have to read so much about fucking golf to write about it. Golf is a sport of wealth, where the businessman and congressman gather to enjoy acres of perfectly cultivated land for the sole purpose of hitting a ball into a hole. While still often associated with Scotland, much of our modern cultural understanding of golf comes from the United States. US greenkeepers emphasized keeping their golf courses in perfect conditions year-round, staging a war against natural plants and insects within their acres until chemical solutions eventually became common practice. Golf represents a purposeful conquering of nature for human entertainment, a sport economist Armin Alchan described as purely capitalist. This is backed by the fact that US President and infamous businessman Donald Trump not only owns his own golf club, but has been known to go golfing during times of economic crisis. Golf has become a major symbol for US capitalist culture, becoming a target for some environmental and anti-capitalist groups, such as the Global Anti-Golf Movement, or GAGM, which fights to both restore golf courses to their natural state and transform them into public spaces. It's important to note Toons also technically partake in golf, but there's some key differences. For one, it's attached to a public park, Chippendale's Acorn Acres, a nature zone surrounded by mountains, woods, and natural water sources. Also, it's mini-golf. Oh my god, it's mini-golf! Is that not the perfect representation of what Toontown is? In the real world, mini-golf is simply a product of the golf industry, an artificial land selling entertainment to kids, not so different from Disneyland. But within the world of Toontown, the capitalist context for the game is absent. It is open and free for all Toons to play, located in the public parks the GAGM dreams of. Toontown Online is the mini-golf of Toontown. Does that sentence make sense? Doesn't matter. Point is, it contrasts Cog Golf, a privatized country club sport that has destroyed the natural landscape and become the capitalist playground for only the wealthiest cogs to enjoy. It is the final demonstration of stolen land, environmental devastation, and parading of wealth that makes up the cogs culture of capitalism, and the United States. Unlike the United States, though, Toontown has not been taken over. While war continues, the Toon resistance has been successful in keeping the cogs away from their homes and playgrounds. As discussed, Toons battle cogs using gags like throwing pies and squirt guns. It is the one thing a cog cannot take: a joke, a resistance of joy. When a cog attacks a Toon, they mostly use psychological warfare rather than physical, exposing them to oil, paperwork, and corporate jargon to sap them of their joy, aka laugh points. While Toons get to recover from their defeat in their nearest playground, cogs do not get that luxury, exploding into nuts and bolts just like their cog buildings. Good to mention in case you thought the Toon resistance was a non-violent one. Important to note once again here that, while cogs are a parody of the US, Toons and Toontown are not meant to represent native peoples. They are broadly a representation of resistance, and more specifically, a show of how children's play culture can act as resistance. In reality, joy and play are not enough alone to resist capitalism, and much of the play Toons indulge in are products of capitalism. However, joy has been recognized as an important piece to resistance in many marginalized spaces. In the Black Joy Project, a collection of essays and images dedicated to Black community, Cleaver Cruise begins with an ode to Black joy as a resistance tool. Quote, Black joy offers a space for using one of the most radical tools to which Black people have free access: imagination. Saturn Sojourning Rage writes that trans joy and community acts as an explicit threat towards capitalism, as capitalist culture has reshaped relationships and identity through the lens of material culture and class hierarchy. Trans joy acts as a resistance from, quote, the categories that capitalist dominating structures depend on for control. These joyful resistances emphasize the importance of cultural expression, community, and most of all, agency, something not everyone is privy to in a capitalist society. Toontown Online poses that children's joy, that play, too, is antithetical to capitalism. It is the main force posed against the environmental devastation, colonial theft, political control, and elite privatization that Cogs aim to spread across Toontown. Children's media cannot be fully separated from the political and economic world it derives from, but it's the culture of play within children's spaces, though influenced by capitalism in many ways, that can act as a resistance to capital culture with the right reframing. It's through creation, community, and an expression of agency, the Toons, the children, fight back. While I hope it's clear by now that Toontown Online has some blatantly anti-capitalist messaging, there is a reason I started this video describing a commercial that used anti-capitalist aesthetics to advertise yogurt. No matter what it was trying to say, Toontown Online was an expensive game filled with Disney mascots for capitalist entertainment. I don't blame you if you think of Toontown's message of joyful, anti-capitalist resistance as a child's fantasy of rebellion against the adult world, rather than a genuine statement of anti-capitalist revolution. How ironic it was, then, when Toontown Online failed to thrive within the capitalist economy. With the rise of ad revenue and mobile gaming, subscription-based online gaming became a lot less profitable over time. In August 2013, Disney announced the closure of Toontown Online servers, and a month later, the game shut down for good. With this closure, however, an opportunity opened. What happens when a decade-running game about community building and resistance against capitalist forces is taken offline by the very same capitalist forces it parodied? The Toons didn't just fight back, they took it as their own. Despite Toontown's diminishing audience over the years, its closure was a big deal. A Change.org petition received over 9,000 signatures, and an article published to CNN took the loss very seriously. Quoting a Toontown member, "This game is a home to us, a place where we can be who we are, where we can just be normal without discrimination and judgment." Unfortunately, the decision had already been made. The month before the servers closed, Toontown Online was made entirely free to play for everyone. No more membership fee. It was a glimpse of what Toontown could have and should have been, a world of public access to mirror what the in-universe Toons got to enjoy. It was a month of both mourning and celebration, the game often horribly laggy due to servers filling up for the first time in probably years. You can still find videos of Toontown's last day on YouTube, including the moment the servers shut off. This was not the first time an MMO had shut down, leaving its members scrambling to find a new home. If you're interested in the topic, I highly recommend Celia Pierce's Communities of Play, Emergent Cultures in Multiplayer Games and Virtual Worlds, in which she explores how the closure of Uru Prologue created a group of online refugees. While the community found other online worlds to gather in, Pierce describes a sentiment among the Uru community that the best solution would be one not controlled by a corporation. The official Uru did eventually return, but with new communities made, the Uru diaspora remained spread across the internet. Toons, on the other hand, were a bit more hesitant to migrate to a new MMO. Disney actually shut down 3 virtual worlds in September of 2013: Toontown, Pixie Hollow, and Pirates Online. Bitter fans were quick to point out that Club Penguin was unaffected by the closures.
I'm going to my house to check this Club Penguin. If you are closing Toontown for it, then it must be really good. Oh my goodness.
So Disney was not a viable option anymore. Was there really anywhere else for Toons to go? I actually don't know the answer to this, because it's a question that never had to be answered. On September 19th, 2013, just as the Toontown Online servers were shutting down, a Toon by the name of Sir Max posted to Toontown's MMO forums page. Toontown Rewritten is a community server for Disney's Toontown Online. A team of skilled Toons, including myself, have spent the past month engineering their own implementation of the Toontown server architecture so that this game can continue. This is not a bunch of empty promises or a remake of Toontown Online. This is the exact same game that we've all known and loved for a decade now. However, this time it will be ran by Toons, for Toons. Folks were skeptical, of course, but soon enough, a website was published, and a month later, the first alpha build was available. It took longer than they had hoped. Toontown's decade-old code was in desperate need of reworking, but the Rewritten team did an excellent job keeping fans updated throughout its alpha test. I still remember logging in every day to read each daily update myself, waiting for the day I could find myself in Toontown once again. By the beginning of 2014, the Rewritten team had set themselves apart from Disney's Toontown team. They had no hierarchical structure or profit incentive, claiming they had no right to ask for money for a game that wasn't theirs. They were also a bit more amicable to Disney than some of the fans at the time. After all, they were working in a legal gray area. At any moment, Disney could have used their own lawbots to shut down the project for good. And yet, they didn't. Rewritten's alpha ended with a presidential election event, in which Toons voted for which of two NPCs would be the Toon Council president. Flippy, the original president from TTO, or Slappy, an NPC created by the TTR team. The event was promoted for 2 months, and while fans expressed disappointment that there hadn't been any major game updates, everyone was treated to 2 major surprises when the election results were streamed live. First, the reintroduction of Cogs as Slappy is kidnapped, and finally, the end of TTR's alpha testing. I could gush about this event. TTR's team did an amazing job with it, but moving on. Toontown Rewritten's beta was released on June 2nd, 2014 to celebrate TTO's 11th birthday, and then on September 19th, 2014, exactly a year after TTO closed, Rewritten became fully open to the public. The 3D Disney mascots that roamed playgrounds were removed, but basically everything else was exactly how Toontown Online left it. What I've always loved about Rewritten is its balance between preserving the original Toontown while also literally rewriting it. The best example of this is how they reincorporate the Cog's origin story into TTR's universe. If you recall, Scrooge McDuck awakened a robot who created Cog Nation, but it was his scientist, Dr. Gyro Gearloose, who created the Cog in the first place. The Rewritten team probably didn't want to risk using these characters, but they also didn't want to ignore them. So here's Rewritten's story, one that was slowly revealed in an ARG from 2013 to 2019. After the Cogs invaded the election and kidnapped Slappy, Dr. Gearloose went into hiding for 6 years in shame. When he finds out Slappy was erased by the Cogs, he returns to Toontown, predicting that the Cogs would eventually erase all Toons if they aren't valuable to Cog Nation. He then creates the Rewritten device, which allows him to transform into a new Toon, Dr. Shirley, and go back in time to stop the Cog invasion. This creates the Rewritten timeline, the one we see play out as early as the alpha build was announced, Dr. Shirley even appearing in the first blog post long before anything was known about him. For convoluted reasons, the Cogs still end up being invented, and Slappy still gets kidnapped. It isn't until 2019, with the Rewritten timeline in new territory to him, that Dr. Shirley acknowledges who he once was. It is true. In a long-forgotten timeline, I was Gyro Gearloose. At this point, I've grown to accept who I really am, though. Dr. Shirley. There's many things I'm skipping about this plot because it's not relevant to this video. I'll link to a Reddit post that goes into more detail, but I love this story so much. It was a great way to recognize Toontown's history and acknowledge Disney's creation of it, while also making it their own, rewritten Toontown. To me, Dr. Shirley embracing his new identity marked a new age for TTR, one where they're no longer weighed down by Disney's legacy, and that's proven by all the unique updates to Toontown they've made since then. In the last few years, the Rewritten team has updated Cog mini-bosses, created an amazing new boss for Cog field offices, and are still working on a new playground to this day. They've also made the game more inclusive by removing gendered language, allowing any Toon to dress how they'd like, and providing an option to display pronouns. In the early days of Rewritten, there was hope Disney wouldn't abandon Toontown for good. TTR only wanted to hold the Toontown title for as long as the official source was absent, and this sentiment is still expressed on their About page. Toontown deserves a team of full-time employees who can give the game the love it deserves, and we absolutely want that to happen. But I think attitudes have changed over the years. Toontown Rewritten no longer feels like a temporary preservation of Toontown. Hell, when the Rewritten team got a hold of Toontown's code, it was in a state of disrepair, filled with memory leaks and opportunities for hackers to break the game entirely. Now, nearly 13 years later, the servers are thriving, and we're getting brand new content that really doesn't feel fan-made anymore. For Toontown Rewritten's 10th anniversary, Joey, aka the original Sir Max himself, expressed his gratitude. Your kindness, resilience, friendships, humor, and joy are what keep Toontown going every day. Instead of looking back on this date as a dark one, we look back and celebrate. Let me be clear, you saved Toontown. Somehow, the ending of Who Framed Roger Rabbit became prophetic. Toontown belongs to the Toons. When it comes to the whole anti-capitalist theme in Toontown, there's an important detail I've neglected to mention until now. There was a secret Easter egg in Toontown Online that you could unlock by asking this random shopkeeper, Whispering Willow, would you like some help? She will then welcome you to the Resistance, and you'll unlock the special emote phrase, Toons of the World, Unite. This feature remains in Toontown Rewritten, and is referenced throughout TTR's website, first spoken by Flippy when Cogs invaded the presidential election. It is a pretty direct reference to the phrase Workers of the World Unite, a popularized version of a phrase written by Karl Marx in the Communist Manifesto. So while I'm sure many details I have discussed in this video were unintentional, it's clear no mistakes were made in theming the Toon resistance around the fight against capitalism. While it may not have been intended as a real-world call to action, Toon still heard the call. And now, under the ownership of Toons, there's no longer a complex asterisk you have to attach to that theme. Toontown Rewritten has only expanded the representation of Cogs as a colonial, capitalist force willing to commit cultural, and now confirmed physical genocide to prove their superiority, while Toons continue to resist in-game and out-of-game. Toontown Rewritten is not the beginning or end of the Toontown community, and many other fan servers came out of TTO's closure. The second most popular server is Corporate Clash, which, unlike Rewritten, aims to provide a unique, updated Toontown experience. It has updated graphics and gameplay, an altered story, and a bunch of new cogs that tend to be the focus of the Corporate Clash fandom. The game reimagines the cog invasion as part of a specific megacorporation, the Coal, Oil, and Gas Syndicate Incorporated. In theory, this puts the politics of Corporate Clash closer to Who Framed Roger Rabbit, parodying corrupt corporate entities within a specific sector. But just like Roger Rabbit, there are some meaningful anti-capitalist ideas explored through the game's new cogs. Disclaimer, I'm not really a Corporate Clash player, so apologies if I get anything wrong in this section. But the cog I find the most interesting in Corporate Clash is the Rainmaker, a weather-themed lawbot boss. Unlike other cogs, she wants to befriend Toons, and doesn't understand why they continue to treat her with disdain. If you choose to spare her at the end of her battle, she'll give a monologue about how both Toons and Cogs have hurt her. She is a sympathetic character, but she also holds a managerial position in Cogs Inc. Maybe she joined the company in hopes she could change it. Who knows? But from a Toon's perspective, she's not only complacent, but an active force in the oppression of Toonkind. She's a complex depiction of how people who benefit from systems of oppression, who present themselves as allies, may still fail to understand their own role in said oppression. Yes, even when they may be oppressed themselves. There's no punishment if you decide not to spare her either. You just miss a few dialogue lines, and she survives either way. The game intentionally made a cog that Toons would have differing opinions on, without condemning them for the choices they make to combat their oppressors. Maybe someday the Rainmaker will join the Toon resistance, or maybe she'll be defeated by Toons. Either way, that's one less cog manager in the world. It's cogs like these that both bring the community together, and sow plenty of discourse. Sometimes folks can use a reminder that you are allowed to like characters without justifying their every action, especially when those actions involve colonialism. Others think it's a problem how much the community is focused on the cogs, which I don't think is a problem at all. They're interesting. I don't even go here and I fucking love these guys. Have you seen the Duck Shuffler? The Toon fan community has had plenty of discourse and toxicity just like any fandom, but it also comes together in some really cool ways. Toon HQ, a website created by wife duo Toons Mrs. Leah Pumpkinhopper and Kara Pumpkinhopper, serves both Rewritten and Clash in providing helpful guides and resources, including the ability to set up a group with random Toons that directly connects to the games. The site also publishes event times for the Cold Callers Guild, a community of Toons who provide opportunities for players of all skill levels to run bosses in a supportive environment. There's Toontown Pride, a community on Discord for LGBTQ+ Toons, known for hosting major Pride events in Rewritten and Clash, promoted by the TTR team themselves. Clash has also organized charity events for LGBTQ+ causes. The Toontown Reddit page, which was created before TTO's closure, provides lists of all open servers and resources, including Toontown source code for anyone to make their own server. There are also amazing creative projects like the single-player roguelike game Toontown The Grindworks. I could go on, but point is, 13 years after Toontown Online shut down, Toons are still thriving. To me, nothing better represents the Toon community more than Beanfests. After defeating the CFO in the Cashbot HQ, Toons receive one of various special Unite phrases, including Toons of the World Spend Wisely, which gives free jelly beans to nearby players. A Beanfest is a tradition that began in the early days of Toontown, in which high-level Toons would collect these Unite phrases, and gather as many Toons as they could to disperse them to. You can still find Beanfest to this day, with multiple Toon communities hosting them weekly across servers. And how apt is it that the name of the phrases these wealth-distributing events are built around comes from the initial Toons of the World Unite phrase. Since the very beginning, there have been Toons embodying Toontown Online's anti-capitalist and pro-communal messaging to create a welcoming environment where no Toon is left behind. Please God, Disney, stay the fuck away from us. Of course, fan transformation is not unique to the Tooniverse. Fandom has been a force of creation and transformation for decades, a space where fans can both celebrate and reimagine their favorite media. In Textual Poachers, Television Fans, and Participatory Culture, Henry Jenkins describes fandom as a sort of folk culture, reclaiming public and communal forms of storytelling in an age dominated by commercialized, copyrighted stories. Fandom also fills in the gaps of commercialized pop culture. Quote, a space within which fans may articulate their specific concerns about sexuality, gender, racism, colonialism, militarism, and forced conformity. That is not to say that fandom is always radical, just that it provides a unique opportunity for radical expression and community building. What makes the Toontown fandom unique, though, is the original media it's based on is hardly relevant. Jenkins describes media fans as peasants within media culture, as they have little control over what happens to commercial media and, quote, must beg with the network to keep their favorite shows on the air, must lobby producers to provide desired plot elements, or protect the integrity of favorite characters. When a piece of media ends, a fandom survives off reconsumption and fanfic, or dies off. Toons, however, didn't have anything to reconsume. Toontown Online was no longer playable. There was only one option then: to seize the means of production. Now servers like Rewritten and Corporate Clash have become the new foundation for fan creation, while the greater Toontown community recaptures the heart of communal storytelling. Toontown Online has certainly not been forgotten about. In 2021, the Rewritten team launched the Toontown Preservation Project, a digital archive preserving Toontown's online history. But history is all TTO has become. Fans no longer wait for its return, and searching Toontown on Google usually gets you the link to Rewritten first. As horrifying as Disney taking back Toontown would be, the last 13 years has proven to me that Toons will always fight back, and make Toontown their own. Cogs and corporations be damned. Toontown Online's legacy is filled with irony, a game of contradictions from the very beginning. Its creators, tasked with the creation of Disney's first MMORPG, aimed to create a game representative of Disney that captured children's imaginations and appealed to parents. By defying the wishes of their executives, they created a narrative filled with Disney inspirations yet opposed to everything the Walt Disney Company stood for, a world for children that presented adult work culture as an oppressive force against play that children are uniquely equipped to defeat. While making profit for one of the largest US corporations, Toontown parodied the US corporate world through their antagonists, then posed those antagonists against the non-capitalist players' world constructed through a history of commercialized media. For these exact reasons, it can be difficult to accept Toontown's anti-capitalist themes as genuine. It's quite literally child's play, a temporary fantasy in a capitalist market. It's a question that must be addressed when looking at any commercialized media from an anti-capitalist lens. Studio Ghibli, for example, is often celebrated for their anti-capitalist themes. And yet, Studio Ghibli is also significantly invested in the marketing industry, animating commercials for businesses in Japan, and cultivating a global market of merchandise for their films. Do these capitalist exploits then invalidate the anti-capitalist themes in their movies? I'm not here to provide a clean answer to that question, but I will say behind every major company producing media with radical themes are artists, writers, and workers who are pushing for those themes. In the case of Toontown, it was not easy. In one retelling of the story in which the original suit antagonists were rejected, Jesse Schell claims it was Disney senior executive Roy Disney Jr. himself who said the suits were disrespectful to Disney executives, leading Schell's team to turn the antagonists into robots without mentioning the preserved business theming. This type of risk-taking behavior is necessary to produce anything close to anti-capitalist media in a capitalist market. Of course, I can't prove it was the intention of the developers to make Toontown anti-capitalist. Schell has stated the intention was to create a work versus play dynamic, as it was something both parents and kids could relate to. There's the Workers of the World Unite illusion, but that could have been from one coder among many. Regardless, theming the work around US business culture and presenting it as something to fight against created, to me, an obvious anti-capitalist narrative, only furthered by the play operating under a cooperative model with largely non-capitalist world-building. The politicization of children's media might be questionable to some of you, but it's in the work versus play narrative that Toontown demonstrates how children's play is already politicized in the United States. Access to play, types of play, and moderation of play are all influenced by the current political and economic atmosphere. As Schell said himself, both parents and children can relate to the work versus play dilemma because both must make difficult decisions on how to navigate play in an adult, work-dominated culture. As commercialized products dominate play culture, children's play has become structured around adult perspectives. Parents, teachers, business people, and more have the power to decide how, where, and when children play. While Toontown Online is not exempt from this reality, its online capacity provides some avenues for unstructured play. Toontown Online presents a world in which children not only own their play, but can also wield it to defend their sovereignty. However, anti-capitalist rhetoric is still most effective when taken out of a capitalist market. And in a wonderful twist of fate, Toontown Online failed to survive that market. With TTO servers offline, the decommercialized and non-capitalist Toontown fan servers have replaced it entirely. The Toontown source code is open access, allowing anyone, online or offline, child or adult, to create a Toontown server. The anti-capitalist narrative Toontown's original creators cultivated can now be accessed without the conflicting capitalist reality. This is where Toontown's ironic history comes to a punchline, as it's Disney's continued copyright to Toontown that prevents any attempt to capitalize on it. While the potential for Disney to reclaim it is still a very real fear, Disney has unintentionally fostered a non-capitalist reality that keeps Toontown anti-capitalist. It's scary and hilarious and amazing. It's important to me that I acknowledge my personal experience with Toontown. I began playing Toontown when I was 3 or 4 years old, having watched my sister play the game and making my own Toon the moment I had enough cognitive skills to use a computer. It was my first special interest as an autistic child, and it remained a consistent source of play throughout my childhood. I was 10 years old when Toontown Online closed. I still remember logging on for the last time, rejoicing when the word spread of Toontown Rewritten. I read every daily alpha update, cast my vote for Flippy in the presidential elections, and tuned in live for the election event and subsequent Cog invasion. I don't remember my Toons in Online at all, but I remember my first Toon I made in Rewritten, a tall blue cat named Saturn. That cat would go on to roleplay magic classes, host game shows, lie about her age to fellow Toons, and continue to read every blog post and story update Rewritten provided. By 2016, Saturn was erased and replaced with String, a bright green cat who remains the Toon I use today. Except, their name wasn't always String. This was around when my engagement with the Tooniverse expanded to fandom spaces, watching Toontown YouTube videos, and following Toon-related blogs on Tumblr. And a year later, I had to change my Toon's name to String because their original name became my real first name when I came out as non-binary. In part, it was through the world of Toontown that I discovered my own identity and grew into the person I am today. That being said, I don't think Toontown made me an anti-capitalist, at least not on its own, but I do genuinely believe Toontown's message of joyful resistance never remained confined to the game itself. I, along with many other children, were raised in the cooperative and hopeful world Toontown showed. Us Toons found spaces to communicate, play, and collaborate, just as the game encouraged us to do. And when the game censored that play, we found ways around it. When the game shut down, the children who had grown up with it took it for themselves and made it accessible to everyone. One of my favorite books I read while working on my thesis was The Queer Art of Failure by Jack Halberstam. It's an exploration of how failure can be used to explore alternative viewpoints and critique heteronormative and capitalist society. In the case of children's animation, failure can be a reminder to, quote, the child viewer that this, too, is what it means to live in a world created by mean, petty, greedy, and violent adults. But instead of avoiding it or turning it into an individual fault, accepting failure involves the acceptance of the finite, the embrace of the absurd, the silly, and the hopelessly goofy. In many ways, Toontown is shaped by failure. There's the little failures that Toontown's slapstick comedy embodies, making light of the falls and accidents of the body. Then there's the big failures, from Scrooge and Gyro's accidental creations of the Cogs in Online, to the ultimate forgiveness Toon shows Shirley in Rewritten when he makes the same mistakes again. When the closure of Toontown Online brought these failures to reality, the Toons of the real world united to make the best out of a bad situation, allowing for an even more absurd, silly, and goofy Toontown. Failure may one day strike the community again if Disney decides to intervene, but I believe Toons will continue to find ways to strive in that failure. That is where Toontown succeeds. Not in winning the game or defeating the Cogs once and for all, but in finding community in anti-capitalist play no matter the circumstances. Is Toontown's non-capitalist Toon utopia achievable in the real world? Maybe not, but it does leave some instructions for achievable anti-capitalist action. Engage in community, prioritize joy, promote agency and expression, and never forget to play. The question is, are you Toon enough? Thanks for joining me on this little revisit of my undergrad thesis, the thing that prevented me from making new videos throughout most of last year. If you want to see more of me outside of YouTube, I actually started streaming on Twitch this year. On
Thursday, June 11th.
I'll be starting a randomizer Nuzlocke of Pokemon Crystal. I want to play through every mainline Pokemon game on stream, so feel free to stop by even if you don't know Pokemon well. You can also check out my VOD channel to see my first Nuzlocke in Pokemon Red. Toontown Rewritten has been working on some major updates, including a rework of tasks and a new playground. When those updates are completed, I will also start streaming TTR with a new Toon, so follow me on Twitch or Blue Sky if you want to be notified about that. Last thing, if you've been with me since the Two Kinds video and have been waiting for more webcomic videos, I've finally got some things in the work for y'all. Stay tuned. Okay, that's enough self-advertising. Goodbye!